Okay.
41 passage 4. So, although philanthropy, the volunteering of private resources for humanitarian purpose, so literally like, although volunteering reached its apex or its climax in England in the late 19th century, modern commentators have articulated two major criticisms of the, I'm just gonna use volunteering, that was a mainstay of England's middle class Victorian society. So we say like, although this like was like a big thing, we now have like two criticisms of this. Okay.
The earlier criticism is that such philanthropy or volunteering was even by the later 19th century obsolete, since industrialism had already created social problems that were beyond the scope of small private voluntary efforts.
Okay, so here we're saying that even by the later 19th, so like we're saying like, hey, it was gone by the later 19th century. So it was like so where they're saying like, hey, we were trying to say like it reached its apex, but we're saying that hey, it was obsolete by the later 19th century because industrialism had created social problems that were beyond the scope of small like it like there were such big issues that just small volunteering wasn't going to help. Cool.
Okay.
So indeed, these problems, and so these problems that we're talking about, these social problems, required substantial legislative action by the state. Okay, so we're saying like volunteering couldn't solve these things.
The state needs to get involved. Okay. Unemployment, for example, was not the result of a failure of diligence on the part of workers or a failure of compassion on the part of employers, nor could it be solved by well-wishing volunteers. So it was just such a big issue that none
Yeah,
of
like
these people.
unemployment was a bigger issue that there needed to be like legislative action to solve this because had nothing to do with the workers, it had nothing to do with the employers, and it wasn't because people weren't trying to fix it.
Okay.
Okay. The more recent charge, so this is in like number 2, holds that Victorian philanthropy was by its very nature a self-serving exercise carried out by philanthropists as an expense of those they were essentially serving. So essentially, it's just that it was self-serving and it actually like hurt the people they were helping.
Oh, okay. In this view, volunteering was a means of flaunting one's power and position in a society that placed great emphasis on status, or even a means of cultivating social connections that could lead to economic rewards. So basically, at this time, volunteering was more about flaunting your status and then kind of getting these these connections to make money to have some kind of
Yeah,
economic.
what I'm thinking here is like it's almost like yeah, like like you're just doing it so people like compliment you, or maybe it's like, and how could you have economic power? Like maybe it's like volunteering, but because you do that, like you get more business because you're doing these things, or
Yeah, doing it for the wrong
like
reasons.
networking and you're getting more, yeah, like you're not doing, yeah. So further, if philanthropy is seen as serving the interests of individual philanthropists, so it may be seen as serving the interest of their class. Oh, so it's saying like since we're just helping ourselves, we're just helping our own class too, not even the people we're seeking out. Interesting.
According to this social control thesis, volunteers, in professing to help the poor, were encouraging in them such values as prudence, theft, and temperance, values perhaps worthy in themselves, but also designed to create more productive members of the labor force. So it almost sounds like that they were promoting these values, but they were going to help in terms of like getting jobs with the labor.
Yeah, and I'm thinking prudence, thrift, and temperance. So I'm thinking like prudence is like
Those sound bad.
well, I know temperance is like control, like temperance is like mild or controlled. You have a temperance,
Mhm.
thrift, so cheap. Prudence, like I feel like that's
I just think
like
prude.
prude. Yeah, like I'm
Yeah.
trying to think about how like prudence is like mild or like
Mhm.
less than almost. Okay. Philanthropy in short was a means of controlling. Oh, so we're just like it's benefiting us by having better people to work for us. And
Oh, okay.
ensuring the continued dominance of oh yeah, the management class. So it's like we're teaching them to be like tempered, thrift, prudent. Like yes, you're like you're listening to us and we're gonna control you and you're gonna work for us and we're always gonna be the owners.
Mm.
Interesting. Okay.
Modern critics of Victorian philanthropy often use the words amateurish or inadequate to describe Victorian philanthropy, as though Victorian charity can only be understood as an antecedent to the era of state sponsored, professionally administered charity. So they're describing the Victorian philanthropy that it was amateurish and inadequate because it was like, I guess, like this predecessor to the era of state sponsored charity, like antecedent.
Okay, so sorry. So modern critics use these words and they act as if Victorian charity can only be understood as the antecedent to the era of state-sponsored. Oh, so
Like,
they're saying like it we only can view it as the eyes of like what came later. So like that must have not been good because what we have now is better. The state-sponsored is better.
okay.
But I'm thinking like, well, maybe it was like inadequate, but maybe it got us going in the right direction.
Hmm.
All right, so this assumption is typical of the Whig fallacy, the tendency to read the past as inferior, prelude to an enlightened present. Yeah, so what is the Whig fallacy? The Whig fallacy is that we think that the other is just like so bad compared to what we have now.
If most Victorians resisted state control and expended their resources on private voluntary philanthropies, it could only be, the argument goes, because of their commitment to a vested interest on because or because the administrative apparatus of the state was incapable of coping with the economic or social needs of the time. So we have, if this era like resisted state control and they had used the resources on private volunteering, it could be based on like because of their commitment. That's how we in like because of their commitment or a failure of the state. That's how we got to this better thing.
Okay, so
Or
sorry. So if most Victorians resisted state control, so if they like didn't want the state to control it and they just spent their resources on the private things, it could only be, the argument goes, the only reason they would do that is because their commitment to a vested interest. Oh, so we're saying like if they refuse to support this thing, it's because they either had vested interest like in ourselves or because the administrative apparatus of the state was incapable of like actually fixing the needs of the time. Okay.
all right. This version of history patronizes the Victorians, who were in fact well aware of their vulnerability to charges of condescension and complacency,
Mhm.
but we're equally well aware of the potential dangers of state managed charity. Okay, so I took this as the author was saying that this version of history is patronizing Victorians because they were aware of what they were kind of doing, like their vulnerability to charges of
But who,
conduct.
okay, I think this is actually not just the people like that are volunteering, but it's also the people that like the lower class. So I think this is like when it says it's patronizing the Victorians, like they were aware that they were vulnerable to like like condensation and complacency, but they also were aware of like what might happen if like the state managed the charity. Like,
Yeah, so like they almost would rather do this.
well, I don't know if it's necessary. I don't know. I think it's just that they understand both ways, and I don't think we necessarily know which one they would prefer, but like, neither of them is like a home run, like easy choice.
Okay. They were perhaps condescending to the poor, but to use an un-Victorian metaphor, they put their money where their mouths were and gave their careers and lives as well. It gave of their careers.
So,
So
so even though they might have been condescending, like at least they backed up what they were saying.
yeah, they put their full effort in, blood, sweat, and tears.
All right. So I feel like the purpose of this passage was definitely to inform us, but there's kind of like this cost analysis here going on where it's not like like it shows us like two different reasons and then like what
Mhm.
are the sides of those reasons, or not even the sides of those reasons, just like a reason and then give us support for why they thought that way.
Yeah, like he introduces the fallacy and then that other thesis, like why critics were thinking this way, but like here's to explain it.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. So did you feel like you understood this the first time you read it?
I feel like I understood like the most of it, but maybe not like every single like sentence of it. Like I understood like, hey, we were introducing this idea, and then we have the issue with industrialization, and then I got these two different criticisms of it, and then here's what he says about each,
Okay.
like the author, yeah. But
All right.
I took the like last bit as like he almost like disagreed with the criticisms, like this version of history, because
I don't think he
patronizes.
disagrees with it. He's just saying like at least they put their money where their mouth is. Like I don't like it's like okay, it's not he could still think it's not great, but it's like
Yeah,
they weren't like complete hypocrites.
that's true. Okay.
All right, so I want you to go ahead and answer these questions again.